Failure in gaming isn't exactly a rare thing these days. In recent times, we've seen many AAA devs drop unfinished titles that either fade into obscurity. We've also seen smaller devs being too ambitious, leading to loads of hype until their inevitable stumbling block. With a lot of these games, it's pretty obvious that they won't work out. And for some, there aren't many redeeming qualities. But what about those games that do have something about them? The games that show promise, but end up not working out? Well, it's those games which I'll be talking about today. So grab some popcorn as I look at some promising games that ended up failing. It's no secret that less than 5 years ago, the Battle Royale genre was everywhere. It dominated gaming, and even began to sneak its way into the mainstream, so it's no surprise every developer wanted to be a part of their success. EA and Activision took their turns at testing out games, and eventually would find winners, until in 2020, it was Ubisoft's turn to drop their Battle Royale game. And it would be called Hyperscape. Their marketing would be focused on big streamers, such as Tfue, who would play the game and in turn cause their viewers to jump in. And early on, it worked. The game peaked at around 350,000 viewers on Twitch, and in the summer of 2020, it was really the talk of the town in the gaming community. Many people, including myself, gave it a shot, and I can say firsthand that the simple looting system, incredible movement, and its unique design certainly made it stand out from other games. It was one of those games that even after just playing a few matches, I felt that the developers were really onto something. People would continue playing for a little bit, but within just a few months, the same streamers who were playing it were back to games like Warzone or Apex Legends, and I think it's fair for me to say that I joined them. For all the good Hyperscape did, it had some glaring flaws that really let it down. Firstly, the crown mechanic completely changed the traditional way you won a Battle Royale, as you would now be forced to hold a crown in the last fight. Secondly for me, was the map, as it always felt a bit boring, and the areas felt a bit samey. And perhaps the biggest issue with most games was a lack of content, and most importantly a lack of good content. By the time this game had entered its live service phase, where new maps, map changes and new weapons were going to be added, it was too late, and the hype around the game had completely gone. Entering 2021, and player counts were so low that the player numbers to even start a game was lowered and map size was reduced. This helped for a little bit, but just a year later in April 2022, the game was shut down for good. A Battle Royale made by one of the largest publishers in gaming couldn't even survive for 2 years, despite being different to a lot of the cookie cutter games we saw during the peak of Battle Royales. The next game I want to talk about is a difficult one. It's a game that for even a couple of years after its release I continued to play and enjoyed playing, but looking back retrospectively, it hasn't really hit the heights that it could have. That game that I'm talking about is called Rogue Company, console gaming's answer to the PC king CSGO. Rogue Company shares many of the traits as CS, with its strategic buying of weapons and items before rounds, short and intense fights over concentrated areas, and tactical team-based gameplay. Where it differed was firstly the fact it was on console. By the release of Rogue Company, CSGO had completely stopped pushing a console game, giving it a free shot at that gap in the market. And secondly, the hero shooter elements mixed in. Countless rogues as they are known, with varied abilities that can all change the course of a fight. What kept me playing for so long was a solid selection of maps, and the said rogues, but also the fact the game had a pretty good live service element, with new rogues and maps added quite frequently. So what caused the game to not hit the heights I expected? Obviously, as I'm sure you could agree, it's ludicrous to say that it could have been as popular as CSGO, given how good that game was then, and given the history it has. But I did think that Rogue Company would grow in popularity, rather than the stagnation that we've seen over the last couple of years. But it comes down to two main reasons. Firstly, it's a phenomenon that many hero shooters come across, with Rainbow Six, Apex Legends and Overwatch all falling victim to this at some point, and that is where the heroes added don't play an effective enough role in the sandbox. I began to notice that some rogues would come into the game without providing enough of a difference to one already in the game, or just not do anything interesting enough for me to want to use them. So whilst there were a fair share of rogues entering the game, I didn't feel like it was worth staying around to play them. The second reason the game failed to pick up steam was due to the developer that made the game. Hyperscape studios, to their credit, have put out some decent games, but the majority of their releases have been unoriginal ideas. In 2016, Overwatch was wildly popular, so Hyperscape gave us the free version named Paladins. In 2018, Fortnite dominated gaming, so Hyperscape gave us the fun but inevitably doomed Realm Royale. And in 2020, I guess they wanted to capitalise on the popularity of Counter-Strike and the new game on the market, Valorant. Due to the continued success of CS and Valorant through the early 2020s, Rogue Company has really fallen behind. Its major selling point of being on console has fallen off due to many people moving to PC anyway, and thus Rogue Company has been left as a game at the bottom of the tactical shooter pile.
Destroy the enemy force. Nice work.
All Points Bulletin, or APB, is perhaps the most notable failure in this video. There was a lot of stuff that happened from the time of this game's announcement to its release, with a reported budget of $100 million. I'll be talking about the game itself here, so if you want to see the things that led up to the game's release in more detail, I highly recommend this video by Robocast. But anyway, putting things simply, APB seemed like it was set to be an immersive open world cops and robbers style experience. And I mean, I guess you could say it was that, but it wasn't without its flaws. The graphics certainly weren't up to 2010 standards, and add to that the number of bugs and glitches found in the game, and it was a real mess. Nowadays, games with a big budget coming out and flopping isn't really a surprise, but back in 2010, for a game to have an $100 million budget and be this mediocre in release really left Real-Time Worlds in a bad spot. In September of that same year, Real-Time Worlds shut down, just a few months after the initial release. A game that promised to be somewhat similar to what GTA Online is now, with some of the most detailed customization we've ever seen, with one of the largest budgets we've ever seen, eventually finished off the company that made it within just a few months. A real showcase on why it's important to put out a complete product. That wouldn't be the end of APB, however, as the reason I know about this game is because shortly after this failure, it was rebooted as a free-to-play game. You might have seen it on the Xbox or PlayStation Store for free recently, and you might have even played it. But if you haven't played it, what I can tell you is, it really isn't worth it. Yes, it can be fun to mess around with friends in an open world, but you can say that about any game really, so it doesn't change a thing. It does get major plus points though for a quite simply legendary Halloween event they did a while back. It would see the Pumpkin Army trying to take down the regular characters, and it essentially worked like Infected from Call of Duty, with players joining your team if they got caught out. It created some really good gameplay in the open world, where you could try and run or drive away from the pumpkins, or find a good place to hold out. Honestly, if that event was the entire game, I don't think I'd be talking about it as a failure, because it really would have reinvented the game into something fun. The last game I want to talk about is called Dauntless. If you've ever played a Monster Hunter game, that is in essence what Dauntless was trying to be, but with a whole new art style and more modern features. I remember actually really enjoying Dauntless when it released in 2019, and returned to it a lot in 2020. It has a really fun concept, and the builds, weapons and armour that you could upgrade and fine-tune to how you wanted it made it stand out. When I returned last year, however, it was clear to me that this game had become completely different to what it was before, and I couldn't enjoy it like I once did. But what actually happened to cause Dauntless to have this missed potential? Well, for Dauntless I think we have to look at two groups of people. Firstly, the people who stopped playing the game on release, and secondly the people who stuck with it but gave up on it later. I remember when me and my friends first installed the game, it was a real split between us on who enjoyed it, and I remember some of them uninstalling early due to it not being as good as Monster Hunter, so there was clearly an issue in the depth of the game that made some people not want to play it on release, which really would impact the future player base this game would have. At the time though, I couldn't get into Monster Hunter, so I gave Dauntless a shot, and as I said before, I had quite a good time playing it. But all of a sudden, within about a year, I felt myself and many others, and people that I played with at the time, began to stop playing Dauntless, and it quickly fell out of my rotation of games. The reason I personally stopped was due to a lack of meaningful content that I felt they added, and I felt the content that was in the game was too much of a grind to be worth doing. But that was 3 years ago, so what is Dauntless like now? Well, from some of the research I've done into the current state of the game and the state of the game over the last year, it seems that developers may have begun to stray away from what many people enjoyed about the game in the first place. Add to that the grind that I understand to still exist in the game, and you have something that is a shell of the promise it showed in its early years. And as someone who once enjoyed this game, it's difficult to return and see the game it's become. So what have we learnt from this video? Well, I think now you can see that the failure of a game can come in many different ways. Whether that's not providing a new experience to what's already on the market, being too ambitious, or not updating the game enough. All 4 games in this video have failed compared to the expectations set when they first came out. But there's plenty of more games out there that have failed, and they may have gone under the radar. These are just 4 that simply I have played, and that I have a first-hand experience with. So if you know any other promising games that have failed, please be sure to let me know what they are and why they failed in the comments below. If you have enjoyed this video, leave it a cheeky like, as it does go a long way in helping this video get pushed out. To continue the discussion in the comment section, I've been Ranger, and this has been Promising Games That Failed.